The Gemara in Bava Kama at the end of the first perek quotes a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim. The pasuk in Divrei Hayamim speaks about Chizkiyahu HaMelech, that when he passed away, they called the Gadol Asalo B'Yomoso. They were mechabed him very much. So what way would they mechabed him? So the Gemara explains Shehoshiva Yeshiva Al Kivroi, that they dedicated their learning in his memory. Thank you. So many soldiers lost their lives in the Milchama that's taking place now. We want to dedicate the Shia tonight in memory of all of the soldiers, but specifically today was the birthday of a Major Shai Shamriz. Would have been the birthday of this Major Shai Shamriz, who was killed in the end of December. He was 26 years old. He was a commander of a whole platoon, I guess. And the family requested that people should dedicate the learning today in his memory. We read in the TORAH in Parshas B'chukoisai that the Torah describes when the Jewish people will come into Eretz Yisrael and they'll do averos, they'll be punished. And the pasuk says, "V'koshlu ish biyachiv." When the Jews will be running away, they'll trip on each other. So the Gemara has an additional level of interpretation on that pasuk, "V'koshlu ish biyachiv, ish ba'avon achiv," that many will be punished because of other people's averos. Kol Yisrael arev mezeh b'zeh. If another Jew does an avera, and it's yesh biyodi limchos, I could have done something about it. I could have prevented him. I could have given him mussar, and I don't. Then I will also be held responsible for his averos, and I will be punished. So this is the pasuk in the TORAH in B'chukoisai. And the problem is that just the other week we read Parshas Korach. And in Parshas Korach, the pasuk says, is that fair? That one person does an avera and everybody is punished? Of course it's fair. We read that already in B'chukoisai. That Kol Yisrael Arev Mezeh B'zeh, one is punished, Kosh Lish B'Abayin Achiv. So the answer is obvious. The pasuk in Parshas Nitzavim, the second TORAH is in Parshas Kisavai. The first TORAH in Parshas B'chukoisai was proclaimed at Har Sinai, on the occasion of Maimon Har Sinai. The second TORAH in Kisavai was proclaimed at Arvis Moyov, when Moshe Rabbeinu made the second bris. Why was there a need for a second bris? They already had the bris at Har Sinai. So the pasuk says that the original bris at Har Sinai was only with the people who were present at Har Sinai. The Gemara says all of the neshamas that are going to be born in the later generations were present, but you can't make a bris with neshamas. You have to make a bris with live people. So the original bris at Har Sinai would only obligate those people who were present. So Moshe Rabbeinu had to make a second bris at Arvis Moav. So the second bris also happens. That can help. That will only be binding on the people who are present by the second bris. So the answer is, the second bris was started by Moshe Rabbeinu, but was completed by his student Yoshua ben Nun. The Psukim say in Yoshua that when they crossed over the Yarden, right away they had to do the brachas seklolos at Hagrizim and Harevut. And at that time, you can't have a nation without a national homeland. So Kolzman, they were in the Midbar. Maimon Har Sinai, there was a lot of achdus. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahor. Vayichan in the singular. Rashi quotes from the Tanoim, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad. The Torah is mitzaref of Klal Yisrael. But the full tziruf of Klal Yisrael is when a nation has a national homeland. Then they're called a nation. So when they crossed over the Yarden and they made the brachas to close at Hagrizim and Harevut, that's when they were considered a nation. A nation is considered one body. So if you make a treaty with the United States, even though you have 100 years later, you have so many different presidents in between and different policies and everything is different. But the treaty, the agreement is binding. The nation is considered one unit. So the pasuk says there in the Tzavim is a continuation of the TORAH in Kisavai. So it says there, Hanistaros l'Hashem Elokeinu Haniglos lanu l'vaneinu adolam l'asas kol divrei haTorah azos. Hanistaros, when someone is doing an avera that we're not aware of, someone's hiding and doing an avera. So Hashem Elokeinu will have to punish him. We can't do anything about it. But if a person is doing an avera b'farhesia, lo nol v'neinu adolam, it's our responsibility to prevent a person from sinning. And the pasuk, that pasuk has 11 nekudas. When you write the Sefer Torah, you don't have any nekudas, but there you have 11 dots on top of 11 letters. And the pasuk Lono Levanein Ad Olam, so Rashi quotes from the Gemara, whenever there are nekudas in the Chumash, we interpret the pasuk as if those letters were missing. But they're there. What do you mean you consider them as if they're missing? So the Gemara explains that this din of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zebazeh did not begin in a Ma'amar Hasina. Only began when they made the brachas to Klolos at Hagrizim HaReva. Everyone, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zebazeh, everyone is responsible for the other one's averas if there's a tziruf of a nation altogether. Until brachas to Klolos Hagrizim HaReva, this din didn't yet begin to apply. It only began after the Yeshua ben Nun was a student of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rebbeinu Shalom wanted Moshe Rabbeinu was the Adon Hanavim. He wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to make the bris. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't allowed to cross over the Yarden. And so Yeshua ben Nun was the Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu began the bris and Arvis Moav, and then it was completed when Yeshua ben Nun made the brachas to Klolos, the Hagrizim and Hareva. You must certainly be aware of the fact that the Rambam wrote his Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Gemara says in the end of Makkos that there are 613 mitzvahs. So the Rambam wrote his Sefer HaMitzvahs where the first half of the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he writes 14 guiding principles that determine what belongs in the minyan HaMitzvahs and what not. And then the second half of the Sefer HaMitzvah, he lists off the 248 mitzvahs aseh, the 365 mitzvahs lo aseh. The Rambam is not the first one. Before the days of the Rambam, in the days of the Gaonim, one of the Chachamim, they're not sure exactly who wrote the Sefer Halachas Gedolos, but it was written in the days of the Gaonim. So we call it, in Yeshivas, they call it the Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedolos. So the Baal Halachas Gedolos is a Sefer HaMitzvah. He lists off one of his opinion of the 613 mitzvahs. The Rambam is not the first, he was not the last. The Ramban disagrees here and there with the Rambam, different opinion. So in addition to the more famous Sefer HaMitzvahs, there is a 3-volume set that was put out a little over 100 years ago, the Sefer HaMitzvahs for Rav Sadia Gaon. Rav Sadia Gaon wrote sort of a poem that's a few pages long. It doesn't rhyme, but it's a piyut in poetic form. And many Balei HaTosfos used to write piyutim. They used to recite them on Shavuos. Even in recent years, some of the Sfardim still recite. It takes a long, long time. Rabbi Soloveitchik said he remembered as a child that they used to say half of the piyutim on the first day of Shavuos, half of the piyutim on the second day, because it would take forever. So on the first day of Shavuos, they would say all the mitzvahs essay. The second day of Shavuos, they would run through the piyut that had all the mitzvahs lois essay. It took forever. So Rav Sadia Gaon has this piyut, and there was a balabas who was a businessman, Rabbi Yerucham Perla, who figured out what is the shita Rav Sadia Gaon, which mitzvahs is he counting, because everything is in poetic form, it's a little obscure. So he put out 3 fat volumes. The whole poem that he wrote is only 3-4 pages long. And this Rav Yerucham Perla figured out what the klolim, what the guiding principles of Rav Sadia Gaon were, and what he counts and what he doesn't count. So one of the mitzvahs that Rav Sadia Gaon counts is you should have the brachas to klolos the hagrizim harezel. So this is a problem that was once in the history of the world. Let's say on Erev Pesach of Yitzias Mitzrayim, there was a din that everyone had to knock on the next door neighbor's door, the goyish and next door neighbor, and ask for matanis. And whoever felt uncomfortable was in violation of the tzivui of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Rambam says he's not going to count that as a mitzvah. That's only once in the history of the world. Mitzvah, the word mitzvah is a technical term. If you look in Rashi's commentary on Chumash, on the opening pasuk in Parshas Tzav, so Rashi quotes from the Tanoim. Everything that Rashi quotes on Chumash, except for Diktuk. Diktuk Rashi's on his own. But whenever he says something with substance, he's either quoting Tanoim or Amoraim, or the Geonim is always quoting earlier sources. It's not Rashi. So the Tanoim say, Ein Loshen Tzava Loshen Ziris Miyad Uledoros. And the Rambam, in the first half of the Sefer HaMitzvahs, postulates the 14 guiding principles that determine what belongs in the minyan HaMitzvahs, what not. So the Rambam says, you don't include things that are only Haru Ashur. There's only once in the world, once in the history of the world. Or let's say, You're not allowed to, when the moon fell down in the midbar, they weren't allowed to leave it over to the next morning. They had to finish everything up. So that's not counted as one of the 630 mitzvahs. It was only for the 40 years that they were traveling in the midbar. Or the parsha says, Kol bas yareshes nachlo. Any girl who gets, if a man dies, someone dies, and he leaves no sons, he only leaves daughters, so the daughters get the Yerusha. So if the daughter's going to marry somebody from another shevet, when the daughter will die, either the husband will yarshin her or the children will yarshin her, one way or the other, so that the nachla will go to a different shevet if she married someone from a different shevet. So that was the shayla that they asked on the occasion of B'nai Slavcha, the yarshin the father. So there was a Hoira Ashur that only applied for the first 14 years when they crossed over the Yarden. For the first 14 years, whoever got a Yerusha wasn't allowed to marry someone from a different shevet. That's not counted as one of the 630 mitzvahs. It's only like for 14 years. That's called Hoira Ashur, something that doesn't apply to L'Doros. So this is a Pella. Rabbi Yerucham Perla asked that question. Why does Rav Sadia go and count the mitzvah of brachas to kolol ha'aris mahareis? Well, that was once in the history of the world. It was never, we don't repeat it any other time. So he thinks that it doesn't mean to make the brachas, the maimara brachas to kolol. He thinks that this din of kol yisrael arev mezeh b'zeh, the Gemara says only began after the brachas to kolol ha'aris maharevel. He thinks that that's Rav Sadia Gon is referring to. Kol yisrael arev mezeh b'zeh should be counted as one of the mitzvahs in the minyan mitzvahs. It's interesting, the Tanoim had this tradition that the word tzav, tzivui, has a connotation of davar hanoeg l'doros. It says in the end of Chumash, another couple of weeks we'll get to, it says, when Salopchad passed away, he didn't have any sons, he only had daughters. So the daughters came to ask Hershel whether they get Yerusha. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, yeah, the din is that the daughters get Yerusha. If their sons and daughters, only the sons get. There are no sons, and the daughters get the Yerusha. Then the Shevet Menashe came to ask Moshe Rabbeinu Shalom, what's going to be? B'nai Slavcha are going to get a Yerusha, then they're going to marry somebody from another Shevet. So then when they're going to die, either the husband will get the Yerusha or the children will get the Yerusha. Husband and children come from a different Shevet. So the whole Chalukah Eretz Yisrael, this is Shevet Reuven, this is Shevet Yehuda, this is Shevet Binyamin next to Yehuda. So it's going to turn out that a section of Shevet Yehuda belongs to Shevet Binyamin. So it's going to be, the whole Chalukah is going to be cockeyed. So Moshe Rabbeinu said there's a Hoira Ashur, only for the first 14 years until they complete the Chalukah Haaretz. That was at the end of the 14 years. A girl who gets a Yerusha should not marry out of her Shevet. So the Pasuk says that B'nai Slavcha followed the instructions that Moshe Rabbeinu gave them. Marry whomever you want, and they married their cousins. He married from the same Shevet family. So that's a problem, according to the Chazal, that the word tziva is a technical term that has a connotation of the din that's noig l'doros. This din is not noig l'doros. The din of a girl getting Yerusha, she can't marry out of her tribe. Doesn't apply today. It didn't apply for the last few millennia. It only applied for the first 14 years after they entered Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara has a fantastic tradition. When you read the Chumash, you would never dream that like this. The Gemara says that din, that Hoira Ashur, that a girl who gets a Yerusha is not allowed to marry out of her tribe. The whole issue came up because of the B'nai Slavcha, but the B'nai Slavcha themselves were allowed to marry out of their tribe. Only the other girls were not allowed to. Where'd they get that from? The simple reading of the Chumash is not so. So the Mefarshim say that's why, because it says they married Latoi be'einechem tienu l'nashim, marry whomever you want. But then it says they married their uncles, their cousins. Kasha tziv Hashem es Moshe. What tziv Hashem es Moshe means a din l'doros. Tzab is a lashon ziris miyad l'doros. If it's a Hirosha, I can't say tziva. So it means the din l'doros is, the din l'doros applied to the B'nai Slavcha. They can marry whomever they want. The Gemara recommends you should marry someone who has the same background. If you have an Ashkenazi who's going to marry a Sephardi, or an American who's going to marry an Israeli, it's a different culture, so it's going to be an issue with Shalom Bayis. It's always an issue how two different people blend in together. And to go and have different backgrounds is going to be more difficult. So that's an Eitzah Tov, always to marry someone who was brought up the same way you were brought up. So they married their cousins with a similar background, but the Hirosha didn't apply to them. They married Kasha Tziv Hashem. They fulfilled the din l'doros. They didn't observe the din l'Hirosha. That's what the Gemara understood in their pasuk. It's very interesting. So the Sefer Mitzvahs Rav Sadigan counts the brachas, the klolos, the hagris maharevol as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. It doesn't mean to have the maimed of brachas the klolos. It means to have to observe the din of kol yisrael arevim zeh b'zeh. What exactly does that mean? So in the pasuk in Parshas B'chukoisai that we mentioned before, it says v'koshel ish b'yochiv, and the Chazal understood ish b'avayin ochiv. That if someone else does an avera and it's yesh b'yodei limchos, I could have given musar. I could have spoken to him and prevented him from doing the avera. I could have spoken to him after we did the avera, get him to stop doing it from now on. And I didn't try. So then I'll be punished because I didn't take care of it. So that's a din of Areyvut with respect to averas. The Gemara talks about Areyvut with respect to mitzvahs as well. We have a din. The Baal Takeya has to be one who's mechuyev in the mitzvah. Misheina mechuyev b'dover. Let's say the best Baal Takeya in the community is a child before bar mitzvah, or the best Baal Takeya is a woman. The women are not mechuyev to blow shofar, so a woman cannot blow shofar to be motzi a man, and the child before bar mitzvah cannot be motzi the people after bar mitzvah. A lot of people, let's say the husband is out of town for business, for Shabbos, and so the wife is alone, she has to say Kiddush. So the European women always felt uncomfortable saying Kiddush as if they're an almana. They don't want to say Kiddush, they don't want to say Havdalah. The men should say the Kiddush and Havdalah. So a lot of the women, instead of they saying the Kiddush, they'll ask their son, who's not yet bar mitzvah, he should say Kiddush and be mitzi them. The child is before bar mitzvah. He's only mechuyev Kiddush midirabbanan. The mother is a bas mitzvah. The mother can't be yotze. The mother is mechuyev Kiddush min Torah. The child before bar mitzvah cannot be mitzi the mother. So the Gemara raises a question, what if the Baal Takeya already blew shofar in shul? Then in the afternoon he goes to the hospital, he goes to the old age home, and he blows shofar again. He was yotze shofar in shul. He's not longer mechuyev b'dover. So how could he be mitzi the others when he's going to blow shofar? Or the Balkari, the one who reads the Megillah on Purim, he already read the Megillah the first time. Then he goes to the hospital, the old age home, he reads the Megillah a second time. How could it be mitzi the other people? He's not mechuyev b'dover right now. So the Gemara says it's okay. The din is a yotza mitzi. Even though he was yotza the mitzvah, the Gemara on the end of the third parak in Rosh Hashanah, even though he was yotza the mitzvah already, he can still blow shofar a second time, and he can still read the Megillah a second time to be mitzi the other people. How come? But he's not mechuyev b'dover. So Rashi explains, and the Rishonim accept it. Rashi says because kol yisrael arevim zeh b'zeh, and calls man that there's still a Jew in New Zealand who didn't consider New Zealand the end of the world. So it calls man that there's a Jew who lives in New Zealand, and he didn't hear shofar yet. I'm still mechuyev to blow shofar if it'll help him. So I'm still mechuyev b'dover. The Iker mitzvah, I was yotze because I already heard shofar. I blew shofar the first time. But still, if there's one Jew in the world who didn't hear shofar yet, it means I'm not fully yotze my mitzvah. I'm still mechuyev b'dover. I can read the Megillah for him, and I can blow shofar for him. And it's not I'm blowing shofar for him and not for me. No. The Abnei Nezer has a raya from the Gemara that when I blow shofar the second time, I have to hear it. Let's say I'll blow shofar. I was yotze tkiyas in shul. Then I'm blowing shofar in the old age home. So I'll put earplugs in and I don't hear the shofar at all. I'll read the Megillah a second time for those who didn't attend the first minyan, and I won't hear the Mikra Megillah. Only the listeners will hear. I won't hear. The other people are not yotze. Yotze mitzi means I'm still mechuyev to hear the tkiyas. I'm still mechuyev to hear the Mikra Megillah if it'll help somebody else. And I have to hear the Megillah the second time, not only to blow for them. There used to be a big Talmud Chacham here in Eretz Blazer Plachinsky. You may have heard of him. He was very close to the Chazon Ish for many years. So he has this chiddush in his sefer. I remember he once visited Washington Heights and he gave this year. So when we had the Shalashudas, I told him that Abnei Nezer has that. He didn't realize. Abnei Nezer was a few years before. Abnei Nezer was 100 years ago, over 100 years ago. So Abnei Nezer shows that Gemara, that even though Yotza might say, but you have to listen to the Tkiyas the second time. You're still mechuyev b'dover to hear the Tkiyas in order to be mitzvah the other person. What kind of a din is that? So we have an interesting pasuk in the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu he should Lech lecha me'artzcha me'meladatcha, you should go to Eretz Yisrael. Ve'escha legoy gadol, I will make you into a nation, a goy gadol. And nivrucha b'cha kol mishpacha Yisrael adama. The Jewish people are the only goy. We refer to the OUisrael as the goyim. We refer to an individual non-Jew as a goy. Strictly speaking, this is slang. So speaking, the only goy in the world is the Jewish people. The word goy, the Radak has the commentary on Tanakh. A lot of people don't realize it has a Chumash also, not just on the Bimaksum. It has very fascinating comments on Chumash. So the Radak put out a Michlol, a dictionary of biblical Hebrew. So they should go used to quote this in his drushes, that the word goy comes from the word giviyah. Gevi nasati l'makin giviyah means a body. So the Jewish people is a goy because Kol Yisrael Areyvut, we treat all the Jewish people as if they're one body. So Kol Zman, there's one person who wasn't Yotzei Tkiyas. I'm part of that same giviyah. So I wasn't fully Yotzei the mitzvah. I was Yotzei Ruba of the mitzvah was Yotzei, but I'm still not fully Yotzei. That's why Kol Yisrael Areyvut, because it's one goy. By the OUisrael, they're not called a goy. In Tanakh you have goy who are ratzas, but it's a loshen mushal. It's a borrowed expression. Really, the term goy only applies to the Jewish people. The non-Jewish nations are considered mishpacha Yisrael mishpacha. It's halacha lamaisa like that. We all know this din. Let's say if you have a mixed marriage and both parents are Jewish, and the father, let's say, is a Kohen and the mother is not, or the father is a Levi and the mother is not, or the father's from Shevet Reuven and the mother's from Shevet Yehuda. So the pasuk says in the beginning of Bamidbar, Parshas Bamidbar, Lemishpachoisam lebeis avoisam. So the Gemara says, Mishpacha sav kuya mishpacha, Mishpacha saim ena kuya mishpacha. Whether you're a Kohen or a Levi or Yisrael, or you're a member of Shevet Reuven and Shevet Zvulun, that's an issue of mishpacha. It says in the Megillah Esther, everybody reads the Megillah, Mishpacha. The Gemara understands Mishpachos Kuna, Mishpachos Leviah. That's a function of Mishpacha. So if you have a mixed marriage where both parents are Jewish, the status of the children, what Shevet they belong to, whether they're Kohanim, Levim, or Yisraelim, is determined by the father. What if you have a mixed marriage by non-Jews? One of the parents is an Amaleki and the other one is not. One is from Ammon and Moab, one is from Mitzri Ve'adaimi. One is from the Zaynomis and the other one is not. So the Gemara says, "B'umas haloich achar hazocher." It all depends by the father. Why does it depend on the father? So the Rishonim, the Gemara never explained. The Rishonim said because mishpacha sav kuya mishpacha, mishpacha seimena kuya mishpacha. Whether you're an Amaleki or Mitzri, Adami, or Hamoyne Me'avi, or Zaynomis, that's a function of mishpacha. If you have a mixed marriage and one parent is Jewish and one parent is non-Jewish, so Tosfos points out at the end of the first parak in Yevamos, there are three opinions in the Gemara. What the din is, how do you determine the status of the children? The one opinion is that in order for the child to be Jewish, you need both parents to be Jewish, both the father and the mother. The other opinion is that if either the father or the mother is Jewish, then the children are Jewish. The Reform woke up 50 years ago with the patrilineal descent. That was outvoted 2,000 years ago. That was outvoted in the days of the Tanaim. That you don't say either the father or the mother makes. There was such an opinion in the days of the Tanaim, but it was outvoted. And the third opinion is what it says in the Mishnah, that it all depends on the mother. So it's a pella. Logically, there could be four possibilities. You need both parents to be Jewish, you need either parent to be Jewish, all depends on the father, all depends on the mother. Shouldn't it all depend on the father? There never was such a shita. Why shouldn't it? If you have a mixed marriage that both parents are Jewish, depends on the father. Have mixed marriage, both parents are not Jewish, depends on the father. You have a mixed marriage, one is Jewish, one is not Jewish, but dafke does not depend on the father. Haloi davahu. Why shouldn't everything be the same? It should be limishpachosim labeis avosim. The answer is that being Jewish cannot be a function of what mishpacha do you belong to. If it would be a function of mishpacha, you wouldn't be able to have a ger. A non-Jew converts, he's not mishpacha to any soul in the world. He's not related to his previous relatives. We say Gershon, his Gair, Kotten is not related, and he didn't get married, and he doesn't have any children. So he's not related to anybody. He belongs to the Goy of the Jewish people, the nation of the Jewish people. By non-Jews, it doesn't depend. So all the time I know that's out of the question. To say that it should depend on the father, that's wrong, because that's only in Yonim of Mishpacha Sav Kriya Mishpacha. So there are three logical possibilities remaining. So there are three shitas. We need both parents to be Jewish, either parent to be Jewish. It all depends on the mother. And each one had a different pasuk. Each time I read the psukim differently. And we all know, we paskin, all depends on the mother. So it's clear that what the pasuk indicates in the beginning of Lech Lecha, Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu, Escha legoy godol, I will make you into a goy. Only the Jewish people are the goy. The Umm Yisraelim are not goyim. Strictly speaking, the bracha that we recite in the morning, Shelo Yasani Goy, so a lot of the Yekis in their city, they have Shelo Yasani Nochri. They don't say Shelo Yasani Goy. Because the Abu Dram wrote a sefer. The Abu Dram is one of the late Rishonim, Asfardi Rishon. He works on the premise that all the tefillas, all the brachas, and all the tefillas have to be recited in a biblical Hebrew. In a biblical Hebrew, it's not correct. You refer to one non-Jew as a goy. In Tanakh, you have a lot of times goyeh who are wrote to goyim, but you don't have one person you call him a goy. That's in Yiddish. The Gemara, it's slang. The Gemara has that. It's a Yiddishism that appears in the Gemara. He said about a non-Jew, the goy did this, the goy did that. But that's not biblical Hebrew. It's not correct. Strictly speaking, the Jewish people are the only goy. They quote the Chafetz Chaim and many other Gedolim, Rab Soloveitchik also. They didn't say Shelo Asani Goy. They didn't say Shelo Asani Nochri. That's biblical Hebrew, Shelo Asani Nochri. On the assumption that all the brachas should be recited in a biblical Hebrew. Why did the din of Kol Yisrael Areyvut only begin after they crossed over the Yarden? Because in order to have a nation, a tziruf of a nation, you have to have a national homeland. So not until they crossed over the Yarden, they entered Eretz Yisrael. Strictly speaking, they already acquired ownership of Eretz on the days of Avraham Avinu. Kodesh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu, "Kol misalach ba'aretz lo orka l'rochba ki l'chu atenena." So Avraham Avinu acquired ownership at that time. And we never lost that ownership. Even during the 70 years of Golus Bavel, the land always belonged to the Jewish people. And after the Churban by Sheni, the land still belonged to the Jewish people. We never lost our ownership. Rabbi Soloveitchik used to speak years ago for the Mizrahi, so he used to say, we do not owe a debt of gratitude to the British for giving us Eretz Yisrael. It never belonged to the British. We never lost our ownership. It always belonged to the Jewish people. It was beguiled by the British. We never lost our ownership. I remember after the Sinai campaign, Rabbi Goren was the chief rabbi in the army. He was the chief chaplain at that time. He wasn't yet the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. So he came to America. He was charismatic. He was unbelievably fantastic. I enjoyed hearing him speak so much. He spoke in different shul. He was so entertaining, unbelievable. So he wanted to say a shir in Rabbi Soloveitchik's class. Rabbi Soloveitchik was giving shir on Sanhedrin, so he gave his shir there. So Rabbi Soloveitchik was sitting in the back. So one notch in his shir was that during the 70 years of Golus Bavel, the Jewish people lost the ownership of Eretz Yisrael, because the Rambam says when they were Mekadosh Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha was destroyed. During the 70 years of Golus Bavel, there was no Kedusha in Eretz Yisrael. But Rabbi Goren was assuming just like the Kedusha was destroyed, so the ownership of Bnei Yisrael also was lost. It's based on Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, who assumes like that in his Sefer on the Rambam, the Eben Ha'azel, because the Rambam says the Mekadosh of Eretz Yisrael the first time around in the days of Yeshua ben Nun was the Kibush, the conquest of the land. It says in Navi, it says Yeshua took 7 years to conquer all of Eretz Yisrael, because there were 31 Malachim, there were Lamed Aleph Malachim, each one had a different palace in Eretz Yisrael, so they had a wage war against the Lamed Aleph Malachim, because Eretz Yisrael is centrally located. It's the link between Europe, Asia, and Africa, and whoever controls Eretz Yisrael has the ability sometimes to control the whole world over there, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Napoleon started to lose the war. The Nazis started to lose the war when they were bombing Eretz Yisrael. They wanted to take over Eretz Yisrael. Napoleon also wanted to. He didn't succeed. So the Rambam says the Mekadosh of Eretz Yisrael the first time around was Kibush. Then during the 70 years of Golus Bavel, the Kedusha was undone, because the Kibush was undone, because the Babylonian armies took over the whole country. So the Kedusha's Haaretz disappeared. So then the Rambam says the Mekadosh of Eretz Yisrael the second time around, there was no Kibush. Till the Hashmonaim, that was centuries later. Ezra Nehemiah were Mekadosh Eretz Yisrael the second time around. There was no Kibush. It was under the ownership of the Goy. It was under the ruler, under the government of the Goyish kings. Malchei Madar Yuparas. Achashverosh was a ruler over Sheva Yasim and Medina, including Eretz Yisrael. So the Rambam says the Mekadosh Eretz the second time around was Chazaka. So this is Alman assume the Chazaka means Kinya Chazaka, that we lost our ownership of Eretz during the 70 years, and then when the Jews moved in, they made a Kinya Chazaka. So that's what Rabbi Goren was assuming, and that was the basis of his whole shiur that he gave. So Rabbi Soloveitchik was sitting in the back of the room, and he raised his hand and he said, "You're not allowed to say that. It's not true. The Jewish people never lost their ownership. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a bris. A bris, the Ramban Chumash writes, whenever there's a bris, means I'll call upon him. It'll never change. It's always going to be like that. Eretz, the Jewish people never lost their ownership of Eretz. So Rabbi Goren, that was the whole basis of his shtickle Torah. So he wasn't going to give in. So he continued his shiur. The next day, Rabbi Goren wasn't there. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said, I want you to keep in mind to the students, I want you to keep in mind what he said yesterday was not correct. You're not allowed to say that the Jewish people never lost their ownership of Eretz Yisrael. The Chazon Ish writes like that in his Sefer on Shvius. The Chazon Ish has a Sefer on every Masechta. So he writes, because of the bris, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a bris with Avram, a bris with Yitzchak, a bris with Yaakov. Bris means I'll call upon him. Eretz will always belong to the Jewish people. We never lost our ownership. The Kedusha was cancelled, so they had to renew the Kedusha with Chazakah, but the ownership of Eretz was never cancelled. So when the Jewish people entered Eretz on the days of Yeshua ben Nun, then when you enter into your national homeland, then you can say that there's a tziruf of an Ummah HaYisraelis. The mitzaref is the fact that we're all in Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam has there are certain dinim that only apply in Eretz Yisrael. So the agricultural dinim, Shemitah, the Yovel, Eked, Shikha, Peir, Trumas, Amaisis, Peret, Olalos, a whole bunch of mitzvahs, the agricultural mitzvahs, only apply in Eretz Yisrael. But there are some mitzvahs, not agricultural mitzvahs. Smicha, you can only confer smicha in Eretz Yisrael. Why? The farmers who work on the farm get smicha? Usually not. So there are farmers who are Talmid Chacham, but the smicha has nothing to do with mitzvah tliyas ba'aretz. So the Gemara never explains why. The Gemara just says that's the din. Smicha can only be conferred in Eretz. So both have to be, the one who's conferring the smicha, one who's receiving the smicha, have to be in Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara says that Rav and Shmuel were both living in Eretz Yisrael. What we're all supposed to be living in Eretz Yisrael. Those of us who are not living in Eretz Yisrael are not doing the right thing. We're really supposed to be living in Eretz Yisrael. So Rav and Shmuel were living in Eretz Yisrael, and they were very upset that in Bavel the Jews were so frum. They were very religiously inclined, but they were big Amaratzim. They didn't know any dinim. They were violating all of the laws of Shabbos and Kashrus and Taras HaMishpacha. They didn't know any of the dinim. So both of them, each one of them on his own, felt compelled to move to Bavel and to establish a yeshiva. So they both went to Bavel. Rav went to one city, Shmuel went to another city about the same time. So Rav went to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi to get smicha before he left. So he succeeded in getting smicha. And Shmuel, we call him Rav because he got smicha. His name wasn't Rav, his name was Abba. But they call him Rav because he succeeded in getting smicha. And Shmuel, every day something else came up. And then the boat was leaving. So he had to leave, so he never got smicha. And you can confer smicha, the one who wants to give smicha, and not together with the one who's receiving the smicha. That's valid if they're both in Eretz Yisrael at the time. But if Shmuel already left Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi can't give him smicha. That's what it says in the Gemara. But the Gemara never explained why can smicha only be conferred in Eretz Yisrael. So the Rambam writes an interesting explanation. Of all places in the Pirush HaMishnayos on B'choros, one would have thought if anywhere it should be maybe Pirush HaMishnayos on Sanhedrin. No, there's a Mishnah in B'choros that Rab Tarfon once made a mistake in Psak Halacha. He said a behema is a treifa, you're not allowed to eat it. They shechted a behema, and he paskin in error that the behema was a treifa, and he said you better feed it to the dogs. After they fed it to the dogs, then he said he realized he made a mistake. He says, I'm going to have to pay. Whenever the rabbi paskin's wrong, and he's responsible for the hefsid mammon, that's why there's a din Torah, and I say you have to pay him money. And then he collects the money, then he disappears. He moves somewhere else. You don't know how to get in touch with him. So the rabbi can't tell him I made a mistake, give the money back. So if it's the rabbi's fault that someone is suffering a loss of money, the rabbi has to pay. That's dina de garmi. It's not a mazik bi'adayin, but it's still a hezek, an oifen of garmi. So you have to pay. So the Mishnah says, Hocha chamor chatarfen. Rab Tarfon says to himself, I'm going to have to sell my chamor to take the money and pay this poor man. I told him they should feed the behemoth to the dogs because it's a treifa. So then they said, you don't have to pay because you have smicha. A whole explanation there. So the Rambam there in Bechoros and Av Chavtes and the Pirush HaMishnayos, the Rambam explains the din. Why can you not confer smicha outside of Eretz Yisrael? So the Rambam says, when you confer smicha, it's not a private affair. It's not that I have smicha and I'm conferring smicha to my student. No, I represent all of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is conferring the smicha. And that's what the Rambam writes. The Rambam writes in 3 different places. The Rambam wrote a Chiddush. Yeroeli, he thinks that if there's nobody in the world today, alive today, who has smicha. The smicha ended over 1,500 years ago. Smicha can only be conferred in Eretz Yisrael, ish mipi ish ad Moshe Rabbeinu. So nobody has real smicha. All the smicha today is only imitation smicha. Rabbi Yehuda Anosi made a takana. No one should paskin any shados unless he has heter hayro. The Europeans, when I was a little boy, there were a lot of Europeans who were just the survivors after the war, so they all used to speak Yiddish. So they didn't say, the ones that I knew, they didn't call it smicha. They called it heter hara, permission to paskin, or permission to teach. Talmud al Yara, Talmud shouldn't paskin on the shadas, and keinoto reshus me rabbi. You need permission to paskin shadas. So it's not really the bona fide smicha. So the pasuk says when Moshe Rabbeinu conferred smicha to Yoshua, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, it's tzivisa also li'ainehim. You should confer the smicha in the presence of Klal Yisrael. Why do you have to confer smicha in the presence of Klal Yisrael? And when Rab Meir Shapiro made the Lublina Yeshiva and he gave smicha to so many students, so they made a big Chag HaSmicha. They wrote it up in all the newspapers in Europe. They're making a Chag HaSmicha in the yeshiva every couple of years in New York in the yeshiva when after 2-3 years of a lot of people getting smicha, so they make a big celebration of Chag HaSmicha. They invite their parents and the spouses to celebrate. Where to get this idea of Chag HaSmicha to have a celebration in public? So it's based on the pasuk with Tzivisa also le'anem. You should confer the smicha to Yeshua ben Nun in the presence of all of Klal Yisrael. So that's what the Rambam says. Yeroeli, he thinks that if there's nobody alive who has any smicha, he thinks of all of the Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael gathered together, and nobody has any smicha. But for all of Klal Yisrael, all the Rabbanim gathered together, they confer smicha to a person or a group of people. That's called Chidush HaSmicha. They can renew the smicha. The smicha comes from the koyach of Klal Yisrael. So the Rambam writes in the Pirush HaMishnayos, he can only confer smicha in Eretz Yisrael because only the Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael are considered Klal Yisrael. The Jews who live in Chutz La'aretz have Kedushas Yisrael, and therefore when mechuyev to do mitzvahs, we say Asher Kedushanu b'mitzvah Yisrael v'tzivanu. The Kedush Yisrael is what's mechayev, what obligates us to observe mitzvahs. But the tziruf of Klal Yisrael, the full tziruf of Klal Yisrael, only applies to those Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael. So that's why smicha can only be conferred in Eretz Yisrael, because the Talmud Chacham who's in Eretz Yisrael is part of Klal Yisrael, and he can represent the rest of Klal Yisrael by conferring smicha. The Rambam has another 2 or 3 dinim that depend on the Jews who happen to live in Eretz Yisrael. They are considered the Klal Yisrael. There's such a Gemara in the end of the first parak in Tainus. The Gemara says, all the Jews who live in Chutz La'aretz are kiyichidim dami. So even if a whole city, Ir Gedola Keninveh, where you have tens of thousands of Jews living there, and they need rain in the middle of the summertime, so you don't say the same Talamatar in Baruch Aleinu. You say the same bracha, then you say the same Talamatar in Shmak Aleinu. When a Yochid needs rain, let's say in Eretz Yisrael never rains. Usually it's rare. Never rains in between Pesach and Sukkot. What if one person needs rain for some reason or another? He's allowed to ask for rain. He's not asking for a miracle. He can ask for rain, but he says it in Shmak Aleinu. You only say in Baruch Aleinu if the tzibur needs rain. So the Gemara said, what if you have Ir Gedola Keninveh, you have tens of thousands of Jews live there? The Gemara said, all the Jews who live in Chutz La'aretz are kiyichidim. The tziruf of the tzibur is only applicable to those Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara has other dinim that depend, the dinim that depend kohol or tzibur only applies to the Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael. The Jews who live in Chutz La'aretz are considered kiyichidim. So the full tziruf of Klal Yisrael only applied. That's what Ben Gurion used to say. The Jews who live in Chutz La'aretz are not Jewish, because he didn't believe in Kedushas Yisrael. He writes in his autobiography that he's an atheist. Probably not true. Probably not an atheist. He was always quoting the Tanakh. In the Knesset, he set up the Chidon Tanakh. Probably not. Whatever. That's what he writes. So he used to say, the Jews in Chutz La'aretz are not Jewish. The Shitasai, he didn't believe in Kedushas Yisrael. So all there is a Jewish nation. So the Jewish nation, strictly speaking, only applies to the Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael. It's half true what he said. So this din of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, once the Jewish people came to Eretz Yisrael, even those who live in Chutz La'aretz, there's still a din of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. This din of Yotza Moitzi, I can say Kiddush for you. If you don't know how to say Kiddush, even I was ready Yotze Kiddush. I can say Kiddush for you. I can blow shofar, go in the hospital in the old age home to blow shofar. A second time, I can read the Megillah, even though I was Yotze ready, because Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, Arvus only began after they entered Eretz Yisrael, and it was a tziruf of a nation, and it's one guy, one gviyah, one Am Yisrael, the only guy. We're the only guy. Mishpacha means they're cousins, uncles, aunts, they relate to each other, they get along, they don't get along. Mishpacha, different people. Goy means it's as if it's one gviyah. So that, strictly speaking, anyone who relates to Eretz Yisrael is part of that guy. Some dinim only apply to those who actually live in Eretz Yisrael, several mitzvahs. Some dinim apply to those who relate to Eretz Yisrael. For example, the Avnei Nezer has a tshuva. He talks about Reform Jews. At the beginning of the Reform movement, they left out everything in the Siddur about returning back to Eretz Yisrael. They were Germans of the Jewish faith. They didn't want to have anything to do with Eretz Yisrael. They left out all the Korban and left out every mention of Eretz Yisrael. They didn't relate to Eretz Yisrael as our national homeland. So he says they're not part of Klal Yisrael either. He has a tshuva halacha l'maisa in Eben Ezer. It's not the minhagim. He has a real din halacha l'maisa that the Reformed Jews that didn't even believe that Eretz Yisrael is our national homeland, that there's a goal to live in Eretz Yisrael, they're not part of Klal Yisrael at all, even the partial part of Klal Yisrael. In the end of Choshen Mishpat, the very last page in Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat of all places, there's a big dispute among the poskim and in the Shulchan Aruch and the commentaries there. If a person's life, a person is bevadai sakana. Let's say there's an epidemic, and someone is vadai b'sakana, and am I obligated to help him out if I'm putting myself into a suffix sakana? So that's a big machlokes. So some say you're not allowed to. You're not permitted to put your life into suffix sakana to save someone else from a vadai sakana. Others say you're permitted to, but you're not obligated to. It's a midas chasidus. And others say that you're obligated to. Rab Soloveitchik said that his grandfather, Rab Chaim Soloveitchik Paskin, there was a cholera epidemic during his time, and there were people who were absolutely bevadai sakana. Rab Chaim said, Paskin la'alocha, like that shita, like the third shita, that the healthy people are mechuyev to take care of the sick people, even though they're putting their lives in risk. You're obligated to put your life in risk to suffix sakana. They save someone else from a vadai sakana. When you go to Milchama, sometimes that's a cholera epidemic. There's no enemy. When you go to Milchama, when there's an enemy attacking the Jewish people, so that's considered one of the Milchemes Mitzvah. You go to Milchemes Mitzvah, you go to war, you know in advance that you stand a chance of being killed. But derech hateva, soldiers are killed in the war. Even if you have the best army in the world, soldiers lose. They lost over 700 soldiers now. It's terrible. In this war, they lost, someone just told me before, 770 soldiers lost their lives in this war. That's terrible. So the din is, one is mechuyev. There's no din that the citizens of Eretz Yisrael are drafted in the army. The din is any Jewish man over the age of 20. You're not supposed to draft in the army before the age of 20. That's a pasuk in the beginning of Bamidbar. The Ben Eshim Shalom Amal Kol Yetzei Tzava B'Yisrael. So Rashi says, Pashup Pshat in the Chumash. You only draft in the army from the age of 20 and up. The Gemara has a boy and a girl become bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, as far as Bezdin Shalmata is concerned, from the age of bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah. And Bezdin Shalmaila doesn't punish until a person reaches the age of 20. Then if he does an Averi after the age of 20, then the Bezdin Shalmaila would punish, but Chorus, Amisa B'dei Shemaim, and so on. The personality begins to be formed, crystallized at the age of 12 or 13. The brain of the girls usually is fully grown, not fully, fully grown, reaches its maximum size at approximately the age of 12. And the boy usually reaches its largest size in the age of 13. So that's how the Tanoim, Paskin, corresponding to the biological fact, the Paskin, a girl becomes bas mitzvah at the age of 12, and a boy becomes bar mitzvah at the age of 13. Some of the reform feel that that's discriminatory against the girls. So they say the girl becomes bas mitzvah at the age of 13. That's stupid. Gemara said the reason why the girl becomes bar mitzvah earlier, because the women mature earlier. You look at young children, the girls always mature before the boys. The boys mature now when they're 17, 18. When they're bar mitzvah, I have a lot of grandchildren. They're not mature till way later. The girls mature at a much earlier age. And the brain reaches its maximum size by a girl at the age of 12. By a boy reaches the maximum size at the age of 13. It corresponds to biology and it corresponds to development. And the Bezin Shalmaila doesn't punish unless the person does Averis after 20. 20, the person is more miyushav. The Gemara has certain dinim that the age 20 is considered godless when you get to certain dinim. So you're not supposed to draft anyone into the army before the age of 20. So the din, strictly speaking, is all the Jewish men from the age of 20 and up. You don't take a guy after the age of 60. He's too old. So, strictly speaking, all the Jewish men over the age of 20 are mechuyev to serve in the Israeli army. That's a Melchemes mitzvah. That's one of the 613 mitzvahs. The Israeli government is not going to send a draft notice to them because the United Nations are closed down Israel. What do you mean? They're drafting the Jews all over the world. You can only draft the citizens in your country. But al pi halacha, the Pashta said there's no difference whether one is a citizen or not. It's irrelevant if you're a citizen or not. After the age of 20, we're all mechuyev to serve. The Gemara has a dispute among the Tanoim. Last Shabbos we read Parshas Chukas. So it says there's a din, a mace, a human, dead body, a dead, let's say if you have the meat in the A&P, is an avela. It's not, didn't have a shechita. So an avela is metame b'mago b'masa if you touch it. But if it has a wrapper on it, then you're not touching it. There's a hefsek. But if you pick it up, if you pick up the piece in avela, even though it's wrapped in saran paper or something, that's masa. So an avela is metame b'mago b'masa. But a human dead body, a mace, is metame not only b'mago b'masa, metame ba'ochel if you're in the same room. The mace is at the end of the room, and I'm over here, and there's a roof that goes over him and over me. That's called tumas ohel. There are other forms of ohel as well. So there's a din of tumas ohel. So the pasuk in Chumash says, "Zos haTorah Adam ki yomizbal," says Adam. So Adam means a human being, or Adam only applies to Jewish people. So that's a dispute in the days of the Tanoim. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the famous Tan Reb Shimon, whenever it says Reb Shimon in the Mishnah, it means Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was of the opinion, and that's how it's usually assumed Rav Poskim hold like that. Taisus doesn't agree, but Rav Poskim hold like that. That Meisei Akum are not metami ba'ohel. They're only metami b'magam b'masa, because the pasuk says Adam ki yamis ba'ol, and based on the pasuk in Navi, we say Atem kriyim Adam ve'enu masalim kriyim Adam. So that passage in the Gemara caused much aggravation to the Jewish people over the centuries, as if the Jewish people consider the non-Jews as if they're non-human beings. We treat them as human beings. If they're out to kill us, so we have a chiyuv to kill all of the Hezbollah and to kill all of the Hamas people. But a nice guy is certainly a human being. What kind of a comment is that? So it's attributed to different Talmidei Chachamim over the years the following explanation. That in the Hebrew language there are different words how you say a person, a man. You say gever. So there's a singular gever and there's a plural givarim. There's a singular ish, or there's a singular enosh, one person. And then the plural is anoshim. That's the plural for ish and the plural for enosh. Then there's another singular adam, but that's the same. The singular and the plural is the same. So why don't we distinguish between the singular and the plural? So that's what the different Gedolim over the years said. Rav Soloveitchik used to say the name of one certain Talmid Chacham, but they say the name of many different Rabbanim. Atem kriyim adam, einem esalim kriyim adam. By the Jewish people, the tzibur and the yachid is the same, because kol yisrael Areyvut mizeh, and it's one goy, it's one geviyah. If one Jew does an Aveira, the Goyim will blame all the Jews, the whole Jewish nation. If one Frenchman rapes a woman, or one Chinaman steals money, you don't say all the Chinese are Ganovim, or all the French are Ganovim. You don't blame the whole nation, but by the Jewish people they do, and rightfully so. It's not that it's a double standard. It is rightfully so, because Kol Yisrael Areyvut Mizeh B'Zeh, the whole Jewish people is considered one nation. So that's what the different Gedolim in the last 200 years, different Gedolim suggested that maybe that's what Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is driving at. Atem Kriyim Adam, this idea that the singular and the Yochid and the Rabbim, by Adam is the same word because Kol Yisrael Areyvut Zeh B'zeh. The Yochid represents the whole Tzibur. We read the pasuk a few weeks ago in Chumash. Kisava Muhammad be'artzachem al atzar atzar eschem b'harayosim b'chatzoitzvus. We have a mitzvah to blow chatzoitzvus. So the Rambam quotes this in the beginning of Hilchas Tainiyos. He says, mitzvah says, say, this is one of the 630 mitzvahs. Mitzvah says, say, lizok ulo hariya. Lizok means more than tefillah. Tefillah means to daven. We always daven to take care of our needs. Or for Einu, for refuah, for parnasa, for shidduchim. We always pray to take care of all of our needs. But when there's a milchama, when there's a major sakana to the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, the Rambam writes, even if there are only 10 Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael and millions of Jews live in Chutz La'aretz, the 10 Jews are the Klal Yisrael. The millions of Jews are Yechidim. That's what the Rambam writes. The Rambam writes, if one, the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rambam was written originally in Arabic. I don't know Arabic, so I use the Hebrew translation. Everybody uses Ibn Tibin's translation. So in the translation, it says like this. I assume that's what it says in the original. So it says in the Hebrew translation, if one can visualize that there would be a Shoah, there would be a terrible war, and all the Jews in Eretz Yisrael would be killed, but there would be millions of Jews living in Chutz La'aretz. That he says the Rambam violated his shvuah. The Rambam swore that Klal Yisrael will always exist. Not that there'll be survivors. There'll be a lot of, all the Jews who live in Chutz La'aretz, that's not Klal Yisrael. The 10 Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael, that's the Klal Yisrael. So if you have a Machama in Eretz Yisrael, that's considered Tzoras HaTzibur. So that's the halacha. Whenever there's a Tzoras HaTzibur, there's a mitzvah that says, Lizuk Ulohari. Lizuk means extra tefillas, special. On a tiny sibur, you say, Avinu Malkeinu. The Chasam Sofer kept a Yoman, he kept a diary. His diary was printed, he wrote a diary in Hebrew, it was printed. I remember when I was a little boy, my father's shul had all these funny swarms. I used to read in between one Aliyah and the other, and they were making all the Mishaberach. I used to read different swarms. So one of them was the diary of the Chasam Sofer. So when he lived in his diary, he writes a Dvar Torah that he said on the occasion of a Sheva Brachas, a Dvar Torah that he prepared for a Bar Mitzvah Bach on the occasion of a Bar Mitzvah, different thing, that he writes about different things that are happening in the world. So he writes, he lived in Pressburg in Hungary. He was a Yeke, but he got a Rabbanas in Pressburg. So he writes, there was a Milchama, and the Jews all had to leave the city because of the war. Every single day of the war, they said, Avinu Malkeinu. And they said the long v'hurachum. Every single day of the week, they said the long v'hurachum. Years ago, in the days of the Tanoim, if it didn't rain until recently, if it does rain in Eretz Yisrael, it's a sakana. It's sakana. Nothing is going to grow. The people can die. You need water to live. In recent years, they have a lot of younger rabbanim in the rabbanut. So around 20 years ago, there was a Atziras Geshamim, and they were saying the special tefillas and the Shemana Esrei. So some of the younger Rabbanim and the Rabbanut thought that we should be goyz at tainis. So the old timers, the old Rabbanim were laughing at them, making fun. There's no sakana today. We know how to desalinate the water. There's no sakana. It'll cost money. But that's not a sakana nefesh. You're not goyz at tainis because you're going to have to spend a lot of money. But years ago, there used to be goyz at tainis because it was a real sakanas nefashis. And they said, Avinu Malkeinu. They said, Shedim HaChamish. When they would be goyz at tainis, they would say, Avinu Malkeinu. Many of you certainly have the 3 volumes of the Kol Kisvei HaChavetz Chaim. So in one of those volumes, they write that during the First World War, the Chavetz Chaim died before the Second World War. On his deathbed, the Talmidim who were near him on his deathbed, he said, there's going to be a big Shoah, and they're going to kill a lot of Jews. This is, I think, 33, something, 1933, I think, when he died. He was an old man. When they wrote up his obituary in the New York Times, they wrote that Holy Tzaddik is 104 years old. That's not true. He wasn't 100 years old. They knew he was very old, so they wrote he was 104. There was a different, in recent years, there was a Rabbi Koppelman from Switzerland who died, I think, at 106 or something like that. When he visited Australia once to raise money for his yeshiva on Lucerne. So they wrote in all the newspapers in Australia, the oldest rabbi in the world is visiting Australia. He was over 100 at that time. So he was over 100, but the Chafetz Chaim died before. So when he was on his deathbed, he's like in the days of the Tanoim, people would die. On their deathbed, they would have Ruach HaKodesh to predict what's going to happen in the future. Chafetz Chaim said there's going to be a terrible Shoah. So the Talmidim who were there said, what should we do? So he quoted the Pasuk Navi, B'hartzion Tia Plata. It's in one of the Haftarahs, B'hartzion. The Hatzalah will be if you go to Eretz Yisrael. But they said, Rebbe, Eretz Yisrael is all, they're apikursim there, they're anti-religious. So the pasuk continues, V'hoya Kodesh, it'll become Kodesh. That's the one of the people who was there when the Chafetz Chaim was dying, was Rabbi Kahaneman, who later on made the Ponevezh Yeshiva in Ponevezh. Then he made the Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael after the war was over. And that pasuk is on the wall outside of the Ponevezh Yeshiva, Hartzion Tia Plata, V'hoya Kodesh. That's what he heard from the Chafetz Chaim on his deathbed. The Hatzalah for the Jewish people because of the Shoah will take place in Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael will become Kodesh. I remember that's where Rav Soloveitchik said when he delivered a hesped when his uncle passed away. So he spoke about his uncle's learning, how his uncle learned, how unusual he was in learning. And then he said about Zionism, they say my uncle was anti-Zionist. So he said, I don't know if that's a good way to describe him, because Rav Elvel Soloveitchik had a daughter who was married to Rav Michal Feinstein. Michal Feinstein was a nephew of Rav Moshe Feinstein. So, and they were related anyway, because Rabbi Soloveitchik's mother's maiden name was Feinstein. Rebellia Feinstein was Rabbi Soloveitchik's other grandfather. So Rabbi Soloveitchik's mother and Moshe Feinstein were first cousins. So Rabbi Michal Feinstein, with his wife, Rabbi Soloveitchik's daughter, lived in America for a few years. They were, first Rabbi Michal Feinstein was together with Rabbi Soloveitchik in Boston. They had a base medrash for a small group of young, promising Talmidei Chachamim. And then later on, when they closed that base medrash, so then he continued to teach in Rav Moshe Feinstein's yeshiva. He was a nephew of Rav Moshe Feinstein. And then Rav Elvelah spoke to them on a telephone, and he said, I give you 1 year to return back to Eretz Yisrael. If you don't come back to Eretz Yisrael, I will never talk to you again. So he says, I wouldn't call that an anti-Zionist. Rav Elvelah, an anti-Zionist, said, never going to talk to the Zionists. So they came back. They came back in the course of the year. But everybody thinks it was an anti-Zionist. He says, no. He says Eretz Yisrael wasn't what he was dreaming. It says, everything will be exactly the way we were dreaming all the years. A Melech HaMashiach had Tzaddik, and a Sanhedrin, and a Kohen Gadol, and a Beis HaMikdash. But he said, this government, Ben Gurion, this is not what we were dreaming about. So Abel Soloveitchik was disappointed. He was soured. It's not Kecholman, that's not what we were dreaming about. And then so he said, that's why they think my uncle was anti-Zionist. And my opinion is that the Torah has a way of forcing itself on the world, like the Chafetz Chaim said, V'hoya Kodesh, it'll become, the Pasuk says, Hartzion Tia Plata, V'hoya Kodesh, it'll become Kodesh. We hope, we pray, it should become Kodesh. So the Pasuk in Chumash says, Kisavim B'chama B'artzachem, when there's a Tzoras HaTzibur, even if there are only 10 Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael, there's a Milchama in Eretz Yisrael, that's considered Klal Yisrael as B'sakon. Even if only 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael and millions of Jews living in Chutz La'aretz, Klal Yisrael is considered B'sakon. So the Rambam quotes the pasuk and it says, Mitzvah says, Lizuk Olo Hariya. Lizuk doesn't mean to say Tilim. We say Tilim when someone has a bellyache. When someone needs an operation, they say Tilim. That's all you do, you say Tilim. There's a war going on. People are killed every day. There are people. Rachmana litzlan. People are losing their limbs, their legs, their arms. Terrible. You have to do something more than that. In many of the yeshivas, in many of the army bases, they blow chatzotzos. They have, it's hard to make. In the previous wars, they didn't have chatzotzos. Not so easy. They had to make silver chatzotzos, have to be made from silver. So they blow chatzotzos. And they talk to say, Avinu Malkeinu. We say in the yeshiva in New York, we say Avinu Malkeinu after Shachris and after Mincha every day, even on Shabbos. It says in Shulchan Aruch that the minig is on Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we say Avinu Malkeinu. But if it's Shabbos, then you don't say Avinu Malkeinu, except for Ne'ilah. Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, you do say Avinu Malkeinu, even on Shabbos. Why? So it says in Shulchan Aruch, because that's the Shas Gmar Din. That's when the Sakana is. Rachmana litzlan, the Sakana is 24 hours a day, every single day. Every single day, people are being killed. Jewish people are being killed. So we say Avinu Malkeinu on Shabbos and Yom Tov also. part of the din of Kol Yisrael Areyvut Zeh B'Zeh is what it says in the Chumash, Ha'achechem yetzel la'machama v'atem teishvu po. You have a lot of Chilonim, I think over 60,000 Chilonim from Tel Aviv, who don't want to join the army. That's scandalous. You have a lot of religious people who claim that they're learning in yeshivas. A lot of them already are in business for many years. They used to learn in a yeshiva. That's scandalous. That's scandalous. Why should my son-in-law knows how to learn better than all of these guys put together. My son-in-law is a grandfather already, and they called him up on Simchas Torah, and he went to the army. And his group, he's already went a second time after Pesach. So in his group, they thought they were only going to be there for 50 days. So they made up, many of them are learned, observant people. They made up, they're going to make a siyum on Makkos. They're going to try to learn an Omid Gemara a day. A blot a day is impossible. They only have 15, 20 minutes that's free to learn. So someone donated Gemaras for all those who want to learn. And every day they try to do an Omid Gemara. So by the end of the 50 days, they will make a siyum. Then they were told to have to stay another 20 days. So he said it's a good thing because some of the pages in Makkos are not so easy. So they didn't understand it. So now they're going to have time to chazer, and then they're going to have a party, a fleshik siyum. When they finish, they're going to finish Makkos. Not such a big mistake, not so easy, not so hard, but it's not so easy. They planned it out in advance. It's a beautiful thing. It's a milchama like an army, like in the days of David HaMelech. Had Talmid Chachamim in the army. In the schus of the Torah, the Gemara says, the army will be successful in battle. I have 3 married daughters who live in Eretz Yisrael, so one of them lives in Ra'anana. So the shul where my son-in-law davens every day, they have a big Talmid Chacham there. And he showed me he's about to publish a sefer. It's a very beautiful sefer. He asked me if I'm nichta bracha. He doesn't need my bracha. He's a very big Talmid Chacham. So he has 3 units to the sefer. The 3rd unit is about whether Bnei Yeshiva should be drafted in the army. He says the whole thing is a mistake. He quotes Talmid Chachamim. The whole thing is based on a misreading of the Rambam in the end of Hilchos Shmita v'Yovel, where everybody always thought that the Rambam says Shevet Levi was never drafted in the army because Shevet Levi is supposed to be Yorim Mishpatecha Li'agam Saroscha Li'Yisrael, and Shevet Levi are the koiloniks. They're supposed to be the international koilel of Klal Yisrael. So everybody misread the Rambam that Shevet Levi was never drafted in the army, and any person who volunteers that he wants to learn all day, he volunteers to join a koilel, becomes an honorary member. Shevet Levi is also not drafted in the army. So he quotes from our Hershel and many Talmid Chachamim. The Rambam never said that. The Rambam says any non-Jew. He doesn't talk about Jewish people. If he's telling you that Shevet Levi is not drafted, I'm sure to put it in the Hilchos Malachim when he tells you whom you draft in the army. He doesn't put it in the Hilchos Malachim. He said over there that Shevet Levi is Nachlas Hashem, the Kodesh Kodashim. And any non-Jew who volunteers to learn the Torah, there's certain parts of Torah that they're not allowed to learn, certain parts of Torah they are allowed to learn. So, called by Yolim, any non-Jew who wants to learn Torah is also Nachlas Hashem and Kodesh Kodashim. The Rambam never said Shevet Levi is not drafted into the army. During the First World War, a group of Kohanim in England requested from the British government that they should be exempted from the draft because they're not allowed to be Metamel Mesim. And in the war, if you're in the army, you're going to always be in touch with dead bodies. So the government transmitted the Schachter to the chief rabbi, who gave over the Schachter to the Bezdin Alon. Bezdin Alon was always a B'kavadiga Bezdin. So at that time they wrote a psak. It's B'ferish Gemara and Kiddushin. Kohanim are drafted in the army. What do you mean? The whole Shevet Levi? Kohanim are drafted in the army, even though there's a din of Tumas Beis. B'ferish Gemara. Gemara talks, is a Kohen permitted to take a Yefas Torah? Only one is allowed to take a Yefas Torah is one is in the army. If you're not in the army, you can't take a Yefas Torah. So of course Shevet Levi is in the army. So he, in this new sefer that his name is Rabbi Binyamin Tabadi, very nicely written sefer, the whole sefer. But the 3rd section, the 3rd chunk of the sefer is all about Bnei Yeshivas. So he explains that this whole thing is a mistake. No. The Baruch Shalom should have Rahmanas on Klal Yisrael. It's interesting. Shlomo Vilna was the Zikan Harabanim of Vilna for many years. He was, I remember when I was a student in yeshiva, we were students in the yeshiva, there was a Rebbe in TI, Rabbi Markellis. You remember the name, Rabbi Markellis? So he was a grandson of Reb Shlomo Vilna, and he said the family tradition has it that his grandfather, Reb Shlomo Vilna, was the Magia on the Vilna Shas. He checked, after they said to type, he checked to make sure that everything's correct. And the family tradition has it, he didn't check against another Gemara. He knew everything word for word, letter for letter. So he just read the way they said to type. He read the Gemara, the Rashi, and the Tosfos, and if it corresponded to what he remembered, he checked it. So I added on that every so often there's a misprint, there's a mistake in the Vilna Shas that only a Litvak would make. It's usually in a Rashi, not in the Gemara. They'll have a shin instead of a stamach instead of a shin, because the Litvaks mispronounce. They say, instead of saying Beis Medrash, they say Beish Medres. They switch the shins and the samachs. So this Reb Shlomo Vilna wrote he was a genius. He writes about his older brother, Reb Tzal Vilna. He was the genius, and he must have been a super genius. Reb Shlomo Vilna was a genius. So he has a sefer Binyan Shlomo, all that in Yori Arachaim. Has a sefer on Yeridei also, Atzei Almogim. So in the sefer, he has a table of contents. So he writes, in this chapter, I discussed the following. If the Balkorian shul is a kohen, he can't lay on Shabbos Parsha Zohar, because you don't draft Kohanim into the army, because the Kohanim are not allowed to be Metam Meisim. And the Sefer Chinuch writes that women are not obligated to hear Parsha Zohar, because Parsha Zohar is only a mitzvah if they're supposed to draft you into the army. So we want you to know that you have to go. So the women are not drafted into the army, so they don't have to hear Parsha Zohar. So Shlomo Vilna assumes that Kohanim are never drafted in the army, so they're not mechuyev to hear Parsha Zohar. So therefore, she'enim mechuyev b'davar and motzi asram dechavas, and they can't be the Balkari. So he writes this in 2 lines in the table of contents, and he says, but I deleted the whole chapter because my brother told me that it's all wrong. His brother told him the Kohanim are drafted in the army. It's a Beferish Gemara. That's like the chief rabbi said in England on the occasion of the First World War. You have to pray to the Rabban Shalom. Usually you're not allowed to pray for an ace. The Mishnah says in Maseches Brachot, you're not permitted to ask for a miracle, but in the Shulchan Aruch it says that when we recite Birchas Hamazon on Chanukah, the minig is that you say V'al Nisim. You're not obligated to. On Purim you're obligated to, because on Purim there's a Chiyuv Suda. But on Chanukah there's an Isa Tainus, but there's no Chiyuv Suda. So you're not mechuyev to recite Al Nisim. But the minig is that you do recite it. It doesn't constitute a hefsek. So the Shulchan Aruch says, but what if a person forgot to say V'al Nisim al Chanukah? He certainly doesn't have to repeat the Birchas Hamazon because he didn't really have to say it in the first place. So the Ramah adds on, but the minig is that after you say Li'olam Ha'yichasreinu, that's the end of the bracha. You say Amen after Li'olam Ha'yichasreinu, at the end of the benching. So you say a lot of Harachmans, added tefillas. So he says you should add on a tefillah Harachman Yasalon and Nisim in the floors, Kishem Shasisa Lavsena Bayam Hamayim Azman Azeh. And then you say the whole paragraph, B'mei Matisah Ben Yochanan, and so on. So the commentaries on the bottom of the page ask in Shulchan Aruch, what do you mean Harachman Yasalon and Nisim in the floor? The Mishnah says you're not permitted to pray for a miracle. I remember the first time we visited Eretz Yisrael. We were married for a while, we didn't have any children, so we thought maybe if we'll visit Eretz Yisrael, we'll be blessed with children. Then we were blessed with 9 children, without any medical assistance. We had 9 healthy children. So I remember the first time, so we spent the week in Bnei Brak, because my wife's grandfather at the end of his life was very friendly with Panovich from Europe before the war, so he moved there. So I used to daven in the Panovich Yeshiva every day. So one day they were davening Mincha, and they wanted to say Tehillim after Mincha. One of the boys in the kollel had cancer, so they wanted to say Tehillim. So everybody's looking, there's some kind of machlokes, and the Mizrach Vant, the Mashgiach, was Reb Chatzka Levenstein. He was an old man. He looked like he's over 100 years old. He was very short. He could be, when he was younger, he was very tall. I only know him for that occasion. He's very short. And he didn't want to say Tehillim. And then Reb Shmuel Rozovsky was saying, Reb Shmuel Rozovsky was very tall. He leans down and they carry on a conversation. Then the Mashgiach agreed he's going to say Tehillim. So everybody wanted to know, what was the pilpul all about? So the Mashgiach said, how can you say Tehillim? The doctors say he's going to die. You can't ask for a miracle. You're not allowed to ask for a miracle. So Reb Shmuel Rozovsky said, no, they say he has the same degree cancer that so-and-so had, and so-and-so survived already more than 5 years. So b'derech hateva, they have cure. They have cures that will extend your life. So the Mashgiach said, okay, if it's b'derech hateva, we're allowed to pray. But you're not allowed to ask if someone b'derech hateva is not shayach. You can ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, have Rachmanis on the person. Sometimes Rachmanis means you should die in peace. You shouldn't have to suffer at the end. But you can't ask to be mispala for refuah shleima, for a person that b'derech hateva is going to die. So that's what the Mefarshim ask. How can you say Harachman Yasalon and Nisim and the flaws? How can you ask for Nisim? And the Mishnah says you're not permitted to pray for a miracle. So the commentaries on the bottom of the page say that if it's a Nes Nista, you're permitted to ask. And even if it's a Nes Nigla, if it's on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael, you are permitted to. Because the whole existence of the Jewish people and the continued existence of the Jewish people, everything is L'mayla min hateva. That's called Ein Mazel Yisrael. The Jewish people, the history of the Jewish people is not Tachas Shlitas HaKochavim HaMazolas. Everything is L'mayla min hateva. Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel were Akoris. And the Gemara says, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were Akorim, and b'derech hateva, none of them they shouldn't have been able to have any children. So the whole coming to existence of the Jewish people. And then the continued existence of the Jewish people is with Nisim. And you speak to the soldiers now, they tell you every single day there are Nisim in the army. When they sent, how many rockets did Iran send? And no one Jew was scratched. Nisim. B'derech hateva, it's impossible. It's impossible. And the Hatzalah that they had on Shabbos, when they took out the 4 captives, just a couple of weeks on Shabbos, people told me there was a bigger nest than Entebbe. Entebbe was a nest, this was a bigger nest. This is a bigger nest, and how they planned the whole thing, unbelievable. Even a genius couldn't figure that out. Everything is L'mayla min hateva. So we should pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he should make Nisim Gluin, and it should be Godei L'chol Ha'amim, who the Roidef is and who the Nirdaf is. And there's a special din when you have Kisavim L'chamad B'yartzachem, and there's a Torah Satzibur, you have to have not only tefillah, you have to have zo'aka. Zo'aka means something much more than tefillah. If we'll daven more and we'll learn more, we'll be zeicha to a gula.